Well, we know what should be done, but what can be done?
Well, the House did act on this just this week. We passed legislation, the Secure Act, which is a piece of legislation intended to bring more Americans into retirement security. But we thought since this is about income security, it was the right vehicle. So we passed legislation through the House in a bipartisan fashion that corrects this problem. You know, this is an example of what happens when we have legislation brought to the House, as it was in 2017, the tax cut bill, that really hadn't been vetted, hadn't gone through committee. Lots of mistakes. This is a mistake that had real consequences for families. We corrected it, and I believe the Senate will take it up. There was talk that the Senate might take it up as early as last night, but certainly when we come back in, this is something that has broad support. It ought to get enacted. You know, it deals with the problems with Gold Star, the children of Gold Star parents. It also deals with tribal payments to children that were suddenly going to be taxed at that 37% rate. Benefits going to fallen first responders, the same problem. So this is a significant issue. It's a mistake. It was a glitch that should have been caught, but you know, that bill was rushed through, and there were a lot of mistakes. This is one that we can fix, and the House just voted to fix it in an almost unanimous fashion.
Congressman, are there other glitches or mistakes in that original tax bill that you think are going to come to light and that will ultimately get addressed?
There are. I mean, there are a lot of technical problems. There's sort of three buckets. Technical issues that were just drafting errors because they rushed it. I suppose you could say this falls into that category. There are also some substantive issues. The way, for example, that the Opportunity Zone legislation, which was included in it, which is the tax incentives for investing in distressed places, it didn't include a lot of the detail that we're now finding could skew those investments actually away from the most distressed places into more affluent communities. So there's a whole number of these things that we're going to address one piece at a time.
Come back to that on the opportunity. What do you mean by that? In terms of what your view that it would skew investment on the Opportunity Zone?
Because it didn't anticipate that the market would pick the highest performing communities, and it didn't provide any adjustment so that there's greater incentive to go to the most distressed places. In other words, a census tract that might be adjacent to a very affluent community in a very affluent region qualifies, where a census tract in my hometown of Flint, where I'm sitting right now, has to compete against that investment with no advantage. And it just doesn't meet, I think, the intended goal. That's not a technical error. That's a substantive error that was not anticipated because the legislation really wasn't given a chance to be fully vetted through the committee process.
And your view is that will be addressed, and if so, how?
Well, I would like to see some sliding scale or some additional incentives for those really hard to invest in communities. There are some technical errors. For example, in an Opportunity Zone census tract that has zero population, in other words, a great big brownfield, an empty industrial site, it might be in a very distressed place and ideal for the Opportunity Zone advantages. It doesn't qualify because the legislation requires a poverty rate to be one of the factors. It just doesn't make sense. So we want to correct those sorts of things.